Welcome to the Global Hosting Toolkit, or GHTK for short. In this video tutorial, we will discuss how to create a hosting request, how to get it approved, and what you can expect during this process. For this tutorial, we assume you have completed tutorial number 1, Basic Principles and Terminology. You will notice that you have two options to log into the system. This first option is to use the standard login form. You will be able to use the usual username and password combination, which will be provided to you by SAT, to log into the system. The second option to log into the system is to use the OpenID feature. To log in with OpenID, simply click on the login button on the right-hand side. This will direct you to a page which requests permission to use your Google account. On the confirmation page, simply allow the use of your Google account by clicking the Continue button. This will log you into the GHTK system. After you have successfully logged into the GHTK system, you will be directed to your dashboard. Reference tutorial number 2, Environment Introduction, for more information on system concepts such as the dashboard. To submit a new hosting request, you need to complete the hosting submission form. You can find this form under the My Profile link. When hovering over the My Profile link, a submenu will appear. This submenu will have an option to create new hosting, which will open the hosting submission form. You can either complete this form and submit it for approval, or save and continue editing later. Pay special attention to the formatting of the fields. Some fields are marked with a red asterisk on top left corner. These fields are required and must be completed to save or submit the form. In addition, there are helpful tips to the right of each field to assist you to complete the form correctly. The first 5 fields are populated automatically by the system. The first field you need to complete is the limited hosting checkbox. If you need to host a limited hosting trip, check the box. For a fully hosted request, leave the checkbox unchecked. Next, please give your project a unique and descriptive name. Add the duration dates for the hosting request by means of clicking on the calendar icons. Select the date from which the hosting will start by selecting the required start date in the calendar provided. Select the date from which the hosting request will stop by selecting the required end date in the calendar provided. If the international flights have already been booked, please give an indication by selecting the checkbox. If help is needed to book international flights, please leave the checkbox unchecked. Next, you will need to add the details of the arrival of the guests in South Africa. Add the flight number, airline, date and time, as well as the airport the guest will arrive at. Next, you will need to add the details of the departure of the guests from South Africa. The flight number, airline, date and time should be added, as well as the airport the guests will be departing from. If you would like the hosting unit to book domestic flights within South Africa, please select the checkbox as indicated. If the hosting request will be hosted by the South African Tourism hosting team, you need to select the South African Tourism option from the drop-down. If the hosting request is being outsourced, the outsourced option should be selected from the drop-down. Hosting requests for SAT hosted and outsourced will differ slightly. See the outsourcing process in Tutorial 6, Outsourced Hosting Projects. Depending on the guest and the reason for the hosting, you may need a filming permit. Indicate if a filming permit is required by selecting yes or no for this field. Depending on the guest and the reason for hosting, you may need to request meeting arrangements. Indicate if these meeting arrangements are required by selecting yes or no for this field. In the Guests section, you will need to create your guest list. For your convenience, the process to load guests has been divided into 2 parts. On the hosting submission form, you create the guest list, but you do not need to add all guest details. We will discuss the guest details later in this tutorial. For your convenience, you can simply complete the required fields. These are indicated with a red asterisk. The rest of the information can be added later in the process. Next, you need to specify how many guests will be attending. To add your first guest, click on the Add Guest button. This will add a guest to the form as a new section where the guest information can be added. This section is called Enter Guest Details, and will be added once for each guest you add. Guest lists can become quite long, therefore you can show and hide each guest with the arrow icon on the left. To add the guest information, click on the arrow icon to show the form. Optionally, you may add the name and surname of the guest. You can change these later, since you may not have this information yet. Notice how the name of the Enter Guest Details section updates to the name you have added. This is helpful when working with multiple guests. You will be required to specify the category of the guest. Have a look at the available options and decide which best suits your guest. When selecting a guest category, the form will extend with some additional required fields. For example, when selecting media as a category, the name of the publication must be added. Once you have added a publication, it can't be changed until after final approval and will need to go through the approval process again. Refer to tutorials 8 and 9 for more information on updating or changing information and documents for a hosting. The position held by the guest, as well as the frequency of the guest publication, are also required since this information will affect the project as a whole. To add another guest, simply click on the Add a Guest again and repeat the process. Notice how guests can have different categories, as well as how some categories will not have additional fields. Remove guests with the trash icon next to their name. Careful, this cannot be undone. After you have added all your guests, you will need to complete the budget vote information. First, give your estimated budget in rands. Note the tooltip for formatting of this field. Also note that the field is marked with ZAR on the right. You do not need to add the rand symbol. This field will accept only numbers. Next, add the budget vote cost center, for example, the code for head office. You can upload additional documents for the budget vote or hosting, but it is not required. When adding additional files to the hosting request, click on the Browse button. A pop-up will be presented from where you will be able to browse to the required documents. The next section to complete is the objective for the visit section, where you will need to give a short summary of the motivation for the visit, a description of the return on investment of the hosting, and a short overview of the itinerary you have in mind. When the hosting submission form is completed, you can submit the hosting request for approval by clicking on the Submit for Approval button. After the hosting submission form was completed, you will be directed to the My Communicator section. The newly created hosting request can be found under the Pending Approval tab. The following icon will indicate that you have submitted your hosting request and it is waiting to be reviewed by the management team. There are 3 authorities in SAT that need to approve the hosting submission form. You can track progress on the Communicator log, but you will also receive a notification when your hosting passes each step of approval. The log will show you when the form is approved or declined, and when each authority has signed and escalated it. Once the hosting submission has been approved, both you and the hosting person that represents your country office will be notified via email, as well as on your communicator. Click on the link in the email or go to your Approved tab in the communicator to view a copy of the approved hosting form. The request will now have to move into the Work in Progress tab of your communicator. Either you or the hosting person will be able to create and edit the itinerary by accessing the template builder system from the communicator. To start building your itinerary, click on the Create or Edit Itinerary button located in the Work in Progress tab. This will take you to the template builder. See Tutorial 4, How to Build an Itinerary, for an explanation of this interface. After the itinerary was successfully completed, you need to submit it for approval, as per Tutorial 4, How to Build an Itinerary. Submitting the itinerary for approval will take you back to your communicator, where the hosting request will be in the Pending Approval tab. The project initiator must review and approve the itinerary. You can do this by clicking on the Itinerary Review button. On the Review Itinerary page, or Read Only Itinerary, you can browse the events of the itinerary and ensure you are happy with the events, timings, and details. You cannot edit events from this page. If the itinerary must be changed, decline it. you can add a reason for declining the request from the pop-up. This will move the hosting request to your Decline tab. For the sake of this tutorial, we will assume that the itinerary is correct and ready to be approved. To approve the itinerary, click on the Approve button at the bottom of the read-only itinerary. This will move the request back to the Work in Progress tab of your Communicator inbox. When the itinerary is completed and approved, you need to finalize guest details and approve the guest list. During guest list finalization, you can find the request in the Work in Progress tab of your Communicator inbox. You can access the form by clicking on the Edit Guest List button. You can save this list and return to it later if need be. Clicking on the Guest List button will direct you to the page where the information of the guest can be added. Notice that the guests you added on your hosting submission form are listed on the right. To edit a guest, click on the guest name. A form with all the required information of the guest will be available. Notice how the information you have added on the hosting submission form is pre-populated into the form and is not editable. This page has required fields such as the passport number, the country of the guest, and contact details. Even though other fields are not required, your hostings will go more smoothly if you add in these details. It would be better to know that a guest has a medical condition before embarking on experiences and the like. Be sure to upload both a scanned copy of the guest passport as well as the indemnity form. Finally, check the box below each upload to certify that the uploads are correct and legitimate. To edit the next guest, save this form and click on the name of the next guest. Once you have completed all the guest forms, you can submit the guest list for approval. You do not need to save your last form. You can simply click on the Submit for Approval button, which will save it automatically. You can approve the guest list from your Communicator inbox from the Pending Approval tab by clicking on the option called Review Guest List. This option will take you to a read-only version of the guest list, with options to accept or decline it. On the read-only version of the guest list, you will be able to accept the guest list by clicking on the Approve button at the bottom. Once you have approved the guest list, the request is deemed to be approved entirely and is moved into the Approve tab of your Communicator inbox. From this tab, you can email the itinerary to the guests and view the read-only hosting forms. Once the dates you have provided expire, the hosting will move into the Completed tab of your Communicator automatically. For more details on the Completed tab and its purpose, please see Tutorial 3, the Communicator and Overview. This concludes Tutorial 5, Standard SAT Hosted Projects. The series includes 9 tutorials which are available on the How-To videos and booklet section of your account. This section also offers help and frequently asked questions.